So, where do you find jewelry to resell in 2025, 2026, just in general? That's what we're going to talk about today, jewelry friends. Where to find jewelry, because I have done a few episodes talking about this, but it's one of the things that I still get a lot of comments and messages about that a lot of you are struggling with. And I know it's getting more and more challenging to find inventory to keep your jewelry reselling business sustainable, profitable, thriving. So, we're going to focus on some things that maybe you haven't thought about, or maybe some things that I haven't really discussed here on the podcast about how to source jewelry for reselling. All right, so that's the direction we're headed in today, jewelry friends. Hello. My name is Desiree, and you know that I am your jewelry reselling bestie. So, like I said, I want to focus on some different avenues that we can explore to get the jewelry inventory that we are looking for. Now, I still believe that buying in bulk, sourcing in bulk is probably the ideal way to go. And if you have not seen or listen to my podcast on that specific topic of how to do that, I will make sure that I link it in the show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I will throw a card up so you can reference that episode, because I literally break down how to source jewelry in bulk. But today I want to talk about some other ways, because I know not everybody wants to buy jewelry in bulk. And I know some of you like to source on a piece by piece basis. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can still make really good money doing that. You're just going to have to be a little bit more strategic, and you're going to have a really solid system in place in order to keep that going. All right. So before we get into the details of that, I like to always remind you to make sure you check out our website, jewelryresellerspodcast.com, because over there you can opt in to our weekly newsletter. And when you do that, you will get instant access to a download that I created. And it is the 20 best vintage jewelry brands that I think the 20 best selling vintage jewelry brands that I think all resellers should know. A lot of you have opted in and you've gotten the download, and you said it's really, really helpful, especially if you're a beginner. Even if you're not a beginner, I still think that it's a good idea to be familiar with some of these brands. So when you are outsourcing, you immediately recognize them and you know that they are profitable brands that you can resell. All right, so let's go ahead and get into today's topic. Like I said, we're going to talk about also some things that are trending, that I think are going to be trending, from what I've seen online, what I've seen in the news as it relates to fashion, jewelry, even interior design. Now, you guys know I do a deep dive trending episode, and that will be coming out probably towards the end of December. And I'm going to talk about the things that are trending for 2026, but I am going to mention a little bit of those things today in this episode. So let's talk about, where do we find jewelry to resell in 2026, and what exactly is trending for the new year? Because this is something that we want to be informed about, because as we are curating our inventory, we want to make sure that we are buying things that we know we can sell. All right. That's really probably the main the main thing you want to focus on is, if I buy this, can I resell it for a profitable amount? Because we don't want to just buy jewelry to hoard, and we don't want to just buy things we like, guessing and hoping that they're going to sell. All right, so 2026 is coming, and the way we source jewelry could be changing. At least I think that things are going to be moving in different directions, and we're going to talk about that today. The resellers who are going to win this year will be the ones who stop relying on the same old places to source their jewelry. Now, a lot of people like to buy jewelry online for reselling, and like I said, I still think that you can make that work, but we're going to talk about some other things. I'm going to give you where I think jewelry resellers are getting some of the best inventory. Now, this is something I have used and still continue to use, and I'm hesitating to share it, but I think this is something that needs to be put out there, because a lot of you are struggling. And my goal is to help you figure this out. All right, so I want to start off with what people are buying as it relates to jewelry. So that's going to be the first part of today's episode. Then we're going to get into the specifics of where to find it. All right. So trend forecasting, what I believe will sell. I think we're still going to see a lot of the quiet luxury carrying over into the new year. This is minimalist gold pieces, solid metals, timeless designs. You're not going to see a whole lot of flashy logos. This is the everyday wearable jewelry pieces that I think people love and they are willing to buy, but they don't necessarily want to spend a huge fortune on. All right. These are not investment pieces. These are pieces that people can wear every day, but they look high end. They look like they are luxury pieces and they look like they could be dupes for some of the higher end jewelry pieces that everybody is talking about online and in social media. Now, the other thing I think people are going to be looking for, and I've talked about this before, this is chunky vintage silver. All right, so Mexican silver, and it doesn't have to be actual silver. I do think that silver tone jewelry is still going to be very much in demand, and people love it because it's so easy to wear. And I think that silver just kind of has that versatility that a lot of jewelry buyers and jewelry wearers are looking for. So thick link chains, also bold cuff bracelets, and a lot of those artisan kind of boho, hammered or brutalist style pieces are also very, very popular. The other thing I think that's going to continue is colorful gemstones and birthstone jewelry. Now, this has always been popular. This is something that people love, especially if you're into the boho, earthy aesthetic, because people like the uniqueness of gemstones, also their beauty and how there's so much variation as it relates to, different gemstones, whether they're precious or semi-precious. You can get a piece of amethyst and make the same exact jewelry piece with it, but the amethyst is going to look different and that's going to create a different look. And I think that's what people really like, is the uniqueness of the style when it concerns gemstone jewelry. All right, so that's still going to be hot, popular, and trendy in the new year. And of course, the last thing on my list is signed vintage designers. All right, this is always in demand. Signed jewelry pieces, I want to say, sell 80% better than unsigned pieces. That's not to say that you can't make money selling unsigned pieces. But of course, the way people search, what people are looking for, and what people are willing to spend money on are signed vintage costume jewelry pieces. All right. So always make sure that you are looking for signed pieces. And, I know it's not like you can just find them every day and they're everywhere. And if you do happen to stumble across a signed piece, sometimes the price may not make sense for you as it relates to a jewelry reseller. But remember, sometimes pieces will increase in value over time. So it may be something that you want to buy and hold on to, if you can afford to do that and if it makes sense for you and for your business. I tend to do that a lot. What I like to do is, if I find a signed piece that I really love and I know is popular, maybe the price isn't exactly going to give me the best margins. I may still buy it and just enjoy it in my personal collection before I actually sell it, which could be months or even years later. All right, so that's a way that I am enjoying some of my jewelry pieces and some of my inventory, and holding on to some of the pieces that I believe could increase in demand and or value as time goes on. Now, I know that may not work for everybody, but that is what I do on particular pieces. I have some pieces that I bought probably at, full price. But I hold on to them, right? I'm not ready to sell them yet. I enjoy them. I wear them. So again, it may be a strategy that could work for you too. But like I said, you're going to have to make that decision on a piece by piece basis. All right, so some of the signed vintage designers that we want to look for, we all know these names: Monet, Napier, Givenchy, Trifari, of course, Signer, Judith Jack, Joan Rivers, Judith Ripka, the names that a lot of us are already familiar with. All right. So if you can find some of those signed pieces, again, I do believe that they are worth, buying if the price makes sense for you. And the last thing on my list is the unbranded real gold. Now, we know that the price of gold is increasing. So a lot of people are looking at gold jewelry as a long term and even a short term investment. All right. So you can sit on gold, and you can even pass it down. And gold will hold its value, real gold. Okay. So if you can find it when you're out there sourcing, I would grab it if it makes sense, in your inventory spending budget. But even broken gold, things that are flawed, things that could, have issues, if it's still real gold, it's worth something. All right. So it could be an investment for you. It could be an investment for your buyer. Again, you're going to have to make that call. But some of these pieces, definitely I would pick up, especially broken stuff like I talked about. I also have single earrings here on my list. I've had this happen a lot where I have found 14 karat gold earring backs, 14 karat gold earrings, just one of them, and you can, bundle that up and maybe you can sell it to a refinery or just hold on to it as time goes on and see what the price of gold does, in the coming months and years. Also, scrap gold, same thing. And tiny pendants, which is really interesting. I do think that a lot of people will spend the money on a small pendant if it is real gold, because again, a lot of people look at not only the aesthetic or the wearability of the piece, but they also look at it long term as an investment. All right, so that's definitely a selling point if you are considering buying or flipping gold jewelry. Okay. So, those are the trends we want to keep in mind as we are sourcing, as we are moving into the new year, and we are looking for jewelry pieces that we can flip to make money. Now, I know there are some people who collect jewelry, and that's kind of their motivation. They're not necessarily trying to make this into a business, but this is what we want to keep in mind if we are interested in making money as jewelry resellers. Okay, so now I want to get into some of the new places to source jewelry in 2026. So, this is what you may want to take notes on, or you may want to, rewatch this section or re listen to this section of the podcast because I'm going to tell you some things that maybe you have never heard before. So, let's get into it. All right, so the number one place, the new place a lot of people are not thinking about as it relates to sourcing jewelry is Facebook. All right, so now I've talked about Facebook many times, and I'm not talking about Facebook Marketplace. I'm actually talking about Facebook groups. And also, there's private um, groups in Facebook. There's public and private. But there are also people who are selling in their groups and they are live selling in Facebook groups. And that's another way you can find jewelry inventory for your business. All right. So this is something that I don't see a lot of people talking about. And there are jewelry groups for everything. There's, I'm in a couple of brooches only Facebook groups where people buy, sell brooches only. There's also buy, sell groups for vintage jewelry, modern jewelry, also for certain brands. I'm also in a Sarah Coventry Facebook group where people buy and sell only Sarah Coventry jewelry. So there's tons of them. So you're just going to have to spend a little bit of time doing some research on Facebook. And there's also Facebook groups for bulk jewelry buying and selling. All right. Now, the only thing about buying jewelry on Facebook is you have to be very, very careful because you can get caught up in scams. That's the only negative about doing this is like, you have to be very careful of the scams. So some of the things I want you to look out for is make sure that the rules in the Facebook group for the buy sell as it relates to jewelry is that they only take PayPal invoice or PayPal goods and services as a way to purchase the jewelry, because that's kind of really the only protection you have. Because that way, if the seller doesn't send the stuff or they send you something that's fake or whatever the case may be, you at least have some recourse to file a claim through PayPal if for some reason the whole transaction goes south. But there are Facebook groups that do have rules in place and who vet their sellers, and some of the sellers may have to pay a fee in order to sell in that particular group, which again, all of this cuts down on the potential of scams and things just not working out. All right, so do your due diligence. But if you are willing to do that, I'm telling you, in Facebook groups, you can find some really good deals. That's one of my favorite ways to source, and it's one of my I really enjoy it because there's also an educational component to it, because you see a lot of these jewelry pieces that are listed for sale. And sometimes the seller is very knowledgeable about what they're selling, and they give you a little bit of history or background or information about the jewelry piece that you typically would not get if you were sourcing on a platform like Whatnot or eBay. All right, so look at some of these Facebook groups. Now, some of these are jewelry groups, like I said, also moving sale groups. You'll be surprised that when people are moving, they will sell their jewelry too, because sometimes they need the money or whatever the situation is. There's also the buy nothing groups. I know that sounds weird, but sometimes you will see people giving away broken jewelry because they just want to get rid of it. Or sometimes some of the buy nothing groups are open to trades as well. In other words, you don't buy anything, but you could trade, for what somebody else has. They may have a bag of jewelry and they may be willing to trade you something for it. Also, mom groups. This is another good one. Look into some of the mom groups in your area, because surprisingly, a lot of moms, once they have littles or once they, go back to work, whatever the case may be, they could be looking to maybe offload some jewelry that they just don't wear anymore, or maybe they need the money and they want to sell it, whatever the case is. Now, the other thing you may want to do, and I just talked about this, I think, in the last episode, where you can create a post on your Facebook page or on your personal profile page saying that you buy unwanted jewelry in any condition. And people can probably even seek you out. All right. That's a good way to let people know what you're doing. If you feel comfortable sharing that, I would definitely do that. Also, decluttering, purging, downsizing, retirement groups. Now, of course, we don't want to be predatory in these groups and, pounce on someone who may say that I'm downsizing or whatever the case may be. But at least you can kind of keep an eye out and see if maybe some of these people might be getting rid of things, specifically jewelry, that you could, maybe buy or trade and make it work for you. Okay, so we just want to be respectful, because I know sometimes, it could be a little bit, you don't want to come across as pushy or, desperate or, anything like that. Okay, so just do it in a respectful way, and I think you could have some success with it. All right, so number two, as it relates to some of the new places to source jewelry in the new year, liquidation lots from small boutiques. Now, this is something that I think could work depending on where you live. If there's like a little boutique or a consignment store, they may be willing to make a deal with you, right? On stuff that doesn't sell, maybe overstock, maybe returns or things like that. But this is probably going to require you reaching out to the boutique or the store owner. And it could even be done online to some degree. But reaching out and saying, hey, I buy jewelry. If you are willing to maybe work something out on your old stock, or maybe your returns, or maybe things that are just, not good, whatever, you probably could work something out. All right. So this is not necessarily bulk, but this is probably buying individual pieces from the boutique or from the store that for whatever reason didn't sell, or maybe it got returned and they don't want to put it back out, for sale because it could have an issue or whatever. But sometimes this could really work. I do know one person who does this, but she does it locally. There is a little boutique that I think it's a consignment boutique. But anyway, she goes in there, I think, every few months, and whatever they didn't sell, she makes an offer to buy all of their unsold jewelry. And it works out quite well. So I'm just giving you the idea. It could work for you. It could be something worth trying. It could be something worth looking into. Okay, let's see. So I also have here on my list online estate sale platforms. And I think I've talked about this. I think I may have talked about this on the How to Buy Jewelry in Bulk episode. But if I didn't, let's get into it now. There are some online estate sale websites that I think could be very beneficial as it relates to buying jewelry in bulk. One of the sites, or let me tell you the sites that I have here. Number one is estatesales.net. All right, estatesales.net. Another one is called Everything But the House. I really like that site, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. Also, Max Sold. That's MAXSOLD, Max Sold. Now, I've partnered with Max Sold in the past, so I know they are a really good site to source from, not only jewelry, but other items as well. And I think that's it as it relates to what I have on my list. Yeah, that is. So a lot of boomers are downsizing. A lot of people are really minimizing their lifestyle. And when people do that, they get rid of everything, clothing, furniture, dishes, and of course, jewelry. So you want to be in position to kind of tap into this and take advantage of some of these situations as they come up. Also, some adult children do not want inherited jewelry. They'll put it up for sale on one of these sites that I just talked about. For whatever reason, they need the money, maybe they're just not jewelry people, whatever. So again, it's all about positioning yourself to be able to buy this stuff when it shows up. Okay, let's see. The next thing on my list is small local jewelry stores clearing out old inventory. Now I know not a lot of resellers do this, and I'm curious as to why. Maybe it's a little bit intimidating, to approach a jewelry store and to say, "Hey, I'm a reseller, or I'm interested in buying some of your unsold older inventory." So I totally get that. But I wouldn't go to like any of those chain jewelry stores. Like I wouldn't go to Zales or anything like that. Or what's the other one? K Jewelers. Like I wouldn't go to those stores. I would go to little individual, maybe mom and pop jewelry stores in your neighborhood, in your town, in your city, and see if maybe they would be interested, right? Now, I know somebody who used to run a jewelry store, and he told me that he would have loved if a reseller would have approached him and said, "Hey, I'm interested in buying some of your old inventory, your unsold stuff." Because a lot of the times they rotate their inventory. And so certain pieces may only be out on the floor for 30 days before it's taken off. And then it just kind of sits in the back room because they like to keep their store inventory fresh. And sometimes the stuff that doesn't sell may never make it back out onto the sales floor ever. And it just kind of sits there, you know. So, and a lot of jewelry store owners, some of them don't want the hassle of having to list it online and dealing with shipping and all of that. So that's one approach you can try in the new year. And you don't have to approach every jewelry store in your city, but maybe there is a tiny little jewelry store that would be more than willing to sell you some of their old stuff. Or maybe you can even do it on consignment with them. Whatever. You can just figure out something that's going to work for both parties and be beneficial for you and the jewelry store. Oh, the other thing I have here too is sometimes they have what's called unsold trays, which is what I talked about. When they rotate their inventory and their jewelry pieces, sometimes things will just, not sell for whatever reason and it just sits in the back. Also, sometimes damaged items or things that are missing stones or broken, whatever the case may be, they may be willing to offload that at a discounted price or a wholesale price or whatever. So it's worth the effort to ask. And like I said, I know this can be a little bit intimidating, especially if you're not like, you know, what I would consider like a professional, a jewelry professional. We're just resellers here, but, it can't hurt to ask. And if it doesn't work out, maybe you could just say, hey, well, if things change, here's my number, here's my email, and maybe they'll call you a week or a month later, and you never know. Okay, so continuing on, consignment store partnerships is another way to get inventory. Now, I think a lot of people are going the consignment route or pre-owned, pre-loved items, especially jewelry, because everybody knows that everything is getting more and more expensive. And so if someone can save money in some way, I think people are more open and more willing to do that. And here's where the consignment store partnerships could potentially come in and help you get some unique jewelry pieces for a decent price, or maybe a wholesale or bulk buy price. A lot of times the consignment stores, they get stuck with a lot of stuff because sometimes people don't come and pick things up. Maybe for whatever reason, nothing, certain pieces just don't sell. And consignment stores don't want to be sitting on stuff for weeks, months, or years on end. So they want traffic. You want the inventory. You can do maybe some type of a deal where you work something out. You can even offer to evaluate some of their jewelry, as a reseller. Now, of course, we're not professional appraisers, but we a lot of us have a lot of experience and knowledge as it relates to the jewelry resale market, and maybe we can share some of that knowledge with the consignment stores. Maybe you can come in one day, set up a little table, and offer to do some free evaluations or assessments or whatever. You just need to get creative and see how this can work, or if it can work, or maybe you guys can come up with another idea that works for both parties. Now, I had a friend who would do this at the dry cleaner. She would go in there and offer to buy whatever clothing items weren't picked up. And it worked out well because the dry cleaner just wanted the price of whatever the dry cleaning cost was. And of course, she wanted the clothing because most people are not going to spend the money or take something to the dry cleaner that is not a high-end piece. And the dry cleaners don't want to, go through the hassle of photographing, listing, and shipping the clothing items. So they are more than happy to just get whatever the dry cleaning cost was for those clothing pieces. So I say all that to say you probably could do something similar with jewelry and offer to buy unclaimed inventory at a consignment store. All right, so I think that's a fun idea. Now, the other thing you can think about is direct from individuals. I talked about this a little bit earlier. You may know somebody in your neighborhood, in your community, in your housing units, whatever, who may be downsizing and maybe they want to clear out some things. All right. So you can offer to say, hey, if you're interested in selling your jewelry, I would love to maybe talk with you about a price or what you've got or what you're willing to part with, or, whatever the situation is. And you can actually help somebody, especially if somebody's going through a transition, divorce, maybe even someone in their family passing away and they just don't want to deal with all the stuff. Now, of course, we're going to have compassion and empathy, when we are helping someone, but I don't think it's um, I don't think it's tacky or inconsiderate to say, hey, if this is something that you may want to consider, here's my information, right? Because you're not pushing anything and you're not forcing anybody and you're not like pressuring anybody either, right? So think about that. Think about people who you may know, or maybe just people who are close to you, proximity wise, who may be going through a change and who may want to consider selling some things just to make life easier. Okay, here is another one. This is the last one on my list. Antique malls and vendor booth closeouts. Now, when I used to sell at the antique mall, you'd be surprised how many people do end up closing out their antique mall booth or whatever because of, whatever reason, and I know that a lot of those vendors, they would love to sell their stuff to either another vendor or somebody who comes in and says, hey, if you're getting rid of everything, I'd love to talk about a price to take it all. I've seen those deals, and you can find some amazing stuff because a lot of the things that are in antique malls have already been curated. It's not like people are just putting junk in their antique mall booth. They're putting things in their booth or in their space that they believe has some type of value, or they have done the research and they know that those pieces have value. All right, so visit your local antique mall. Get to know some of the vendors. You don't have to go every week, but maybe, once every few months or once a month, if that makes sense, for your schedule or whatever, and get to know some of the vendors and see what type of pieces that they could be selling. And sometimes too, because I've had this happen where I go into my favorite antique mall and some of them, they've had stuff sitting for so long that they're willing to make a deal. They're willing to give you the stuff, very cheaply or at least at cost, especially if you're going to buy in bulk. All right, so keep that in mind if you have an antique mall in your area, or even one that may not be super close, but it's you can make a day trip out of it or something like that. And just get on the radar. Maybe make some business cards, be willing to, give your phone number, email, whatever, so someone can contact you and say, hey, if you're ever interested in selling some of these pieces in bulk, or if you would like to do, maybe a deal or a closeout or whatever, here's my information. I would love to talk to you about it, or I would love to see if we could work something out together. Because you never know, stuff comes up, and sometimes things happen unexpectedly, and people do need to offload their jewelry inventory quickly, right? And sometimes they're willing to take less, just because they're in a situation where they desperately need to just move the items and they just need to sell it. All right, so those are some of the new ways that you can get jewelry inventory that I think are going to be more strategic in 2026. Let's go over them. Number one is Facebook groups. I talked about that. Number two, liquidation lots from small boutiques, right? So we're not talking pallets, we're talking about just unsold or maybe overstock boutique jewelry. Number three, online estate sale platforms. Number four is small local jewelry stores. Maybe they're clearing out some old stuff. Number five is consignment store partnerships. And number six is maybe some individuals in your circle, in your community, could be downsizing or going through a transition of some sort, and they may want to offload some jewelry pieces. And then number seven is the antique malls. Get to know those vendors, because I'm telling you, you'd be surprised how many vendors are looking for a way to sell a bunch of stuff, for whatever reason. All right. So here's some things that I want you to stop doing in 2026. All right. Some things that maybe a lot of us already know, maybe some of us don't. But number one, we are going to stop relying on thrift stores. Now, I'm not saying you can't go to a thrift store ever again, but let's not consider thrift stores a viable, reliable source of jewelry inventory. Even if your thrift store does sell jewelry, usually the price they have makes it kind of difficult for you to actually flip those pieces for a profit. Or sometimes it's just a lot of junk that you probably wouldn't want to resell anyway. Now, I know I've gotten lucky with some of my local thrift stores, but as you've probably seen, it's just like pieces here and there. It's not enough. It's not a volume of jewelry pieces that I think would be able to sustain a profitable jewelry reselling business, right? Because there's just no way you're going to buy enough inventory that's resellable, every week at a thrift store. There's just no way, especially with Goodwill, because they put everything online. So that's the one thing we're going to stop doing. We are going to stop relying on thrift stores for jewelry reselling inventory. Number 2, we're going to stop buying giant junk lots on eBay. You know, at one point in time, you could find some decent stuff, but it's getting harder and harder to do so. I've even talked about this in past episodes that you could source this way on eBay. But unless the seller gives you good stuff and the price is right, there's a lot of junk out there. And so I would really, really not consider that a solid way to source inventory. Now, you can still do it and you may get lucky and you may find some things that work, but it's not really a reliable source to get the jewelry inventory you need, especially if you're buying lots where you don't get to see all of the individual pieces. So you really don't know what you're getting. All right. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to research all of the listings, and then it's a lot of work to sort through piles and piles of jewelry once you get those lots. And you may not get anything good, right? And you spent all that time and money, doing the work, and it just may not be profitable for you. Okay. Let's see. And stop believing that you can only source from thrift stores, because I've had people say this where they say, oh, you can get jewelry at thrift stores. You can, but you're not going to get enough, like I said, to really create a sustainable, thriving, consistent income business. All right. So make sure that you are aware of that. And I think a lot of us already know, but in case you didn't, I'm throwing it out there. Okay, so wrapping up, these are some questions I want you to ask yourself when you are sourcing and when you are looking for pieces. Number 1, you want to ask yourself, is there a demand for this style in 2026 or right now? Like, are people actually buying this? Is this something that is in demand? Is this something that people are looking for? Number 2, is this jewelry piece resellable? Is it in a good enough condition that I can sell this without having to take a cut because it's flawed, broken, damaged, or whatever the case may be? All right, so we want to make sure that we are looking for pieces that are in resellable condition. And number 3, this is the big one. If you are a serious jewelry reseller, you need to ask yourself this every time you go out sourcing. And that question is, can I get this in repeatable quantities? This is the game changer from hobby reseller to professional reseller. Can you get this jewelry, same quality of jewelry, consistently in quantities that make sense for your business? Now, once you learn how to do this and master this, I'm telling you, your business will totally will totally change. It will totally take off. You will make the money you need to make or you want to make. All right? But that is the part that is challenging for a lot of us, finding the stuff, and then can we find it again and again and again? And can we find it in the amount, in the volume that we need in order to make the money we want to make? All right. So that's what this entire episode is about. It's about finding a repeatable source of jewelry inventory that you can resell consistently. That's probably the secret, and it's not even really a secret because any type of reselling business, that's what you're going to need. You're going to need a consistent flow of inventory so you can consistently make money. And I know that's not easy, and we all have different levels that we're trying to get to as it relates to this. We all have goals, and not all of us have the budget or the time or even the desire, to do this at a higher level. But that's really what it's going to take. Even if you're just doing this part time, you still need to get, secure a consistent source of inventory. And I know it's not easy, especially for jewelry. It's not easy. For clothing, it's a little bit easier, but jewelry is its own beast, right? So we're going to figure this out. And that's really the goal. That's really what the foundation of a successful jewelry reselling business is. All right. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, please make sure you are subscribed or make sure you're following the podcast if you're listening to the audio version, because that's everything I do here. I try to bring you the information that's going to help you do exactly that. Okay, so that is it, jewelry friends. That is what I got for you. This episode was really about leveling up your sourcing strategy, evolving to the next level reseller that you want to be, and to stop doing the things that are not working, or stop following the crowd and doing what everybody else is doing, because sometimes that could work. But we're all individuals. We all have a different skill set, and we don't all have access to the same things. So you need to figure out what your magic formula is as it relates to sourcing jewelry inventory that can help you make this a full-time business if that's what you want. Okay, so remember, we want to be adaptable and we want to be flexible, because I think that's one of the things where I see a lot of people get stuck as it relates to jewelry reselling, is like they hesitate, or they don't want to do anything different, or they're afraid to try something different. So they stay stuck because, they just keep doing what they are doing, and then they don't get different results. And it's very frustrating, right? Trust me, I've been there. I know. So that is it. All right. So I hope that you found this episode helpful. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, observations, please drop them in the comment section, because I think we all can learn and we all can figure this out together. We all can make this work. I truly believe that. I know people who are doing it. I've done it. So I know it's possible. And I think that as time goes on, we're just going to get better and better, right? There's no shortage of jewelry. There's just a matter of us being a little bit more creative as it relates to our sourcing strategies. All right. So, like I said, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I'll check in with you again really soon.